It was nearly midnight when Rowan Pierce's rusted-out pickup groaned to a stop beside the sleek black Mercedes with its hood up and hazard lights blinking like a distress signal from another world. He rubbed the back of his neck, sighing. "Of course it's a Mercedes," he muttered, climbing out of his truck. "Probably someone who's never changed their own tire, let alone jump-started a car." But when the driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out barefoot, in a red designer dress bunched up from sitting too long, Rowan's breath caught. She looked like she didn't belong on the side of a dark road in the middle of a sleepy town. She looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. "Do you need help?" he asked, trying not to sound like he'd just forgotten how to speak. She looked up and her voice was calm but frustrated, like this wasn't the first thing to go wrong tonight. "Yeah, my car died. I think the battery's shot. Got cables in the back." He glanced at her bare feet. "You're not from around here, are you?" "Depends," she said and smiled faintly. "Is it that obvious?" "Just a bit." "I'm Delilah Daniels." Rowan nodded. "Rowan Pierce, let me grab my jumper cables." As he walked back to his truck, he caught himself wondering what she was doing alone out here off Highway 17. She didn't say much while he connected the cables, but she kept watching him. Not the way people usually stared at him like he was just another beat-down single dad with oil stains on his shirt, but like she saw something else entirely. A spark flew. The engine coughed, then roared to life. Delilah's eyes lit up. "You're a miracle worker." Rowan laughed. "Nah, just a guy who's had to jumpstart his truck more times than I can count." She tilted her head. "You always stop to help strangers in the middle of the night," he shrugged. "You looked stuck." "And I've got a 5-year-old at home. I'd hope someone would help her out someday." Her gaze softened. "You're a dad." "Yeah, Naomi, she's my world." They stood in silence for a beat, the hum of the Mercedes filling the space between them. "Let me buy you coffee," she said suddenly. "You don't owe me anything." "I know, but I want to. There's a diner still open down the road, right?" Rowan hesitated. "You sure?" Delilah smiled. "I've got shoes in the car. I'm resourceful." He didn't know what made him say yes. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like he wasn't just a guy scraping by. Or maybe he just wanted to sit across from someone who didn't see him as a charity case. 15 minutes later, they were in a booth at Lou's Diner, her heels now on, her dress still too fancy for the fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. "So what do you do, Rowan?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "I work construction during the day. Nights, I do handyman work. Odd jobs." "Whatever pays the bills." He paused. "Naomi's mom left when she was 3, been just a since." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He shrugged. "It's not all bad. She's smart, brave, too honest for her own good sometimes." Delilah grinned. "Sounds like someone I'd like. She'd probably ask you if you were a princess." Her smile faltered just a little. "And what about you?" he asked. "What do you do?" Delilah hesitated. "I manage investments." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "That vague, huh?" "I travel a lot. I used to live here, actually. Grew up in this town, moved away after college." "Why'd you come back?" She looked down at her coffee. "Sometimes you need to remember where you came from, even if it doesn't remember you." There was something in her voice, loneliness, maybe, but he didn't push. Instead, they talked. About everything and nothing. About Naomi's obsession with dinosaurs. About the old movie theater that used to sit where the new gas station was. About how Delilah missed thunderstorms and greasy diner food. When they finally stepped outside again, the sky had started to lighten at the edges. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, rubbing his hands together against the chill. "Thank you for saving me." She paused. "Will I see you again?" Rowan gave her a half smile. "I'm at Lou's most mornings before work. If you're ever around." Delilah nodded. "I might be." He watched her climb into her Mercedes, the engine purring to life again. She gave him a little wave before pulling away, her taillights disappearing into the early dawn. Rowan stood there for a moment, feeling like something had shifted. Like maybe, just maybe, his luck was about to change. But what he didn't know was that Delilah Daniels wasn't just some lost traveler or a woman returning home for nostalgia's sake. She was a millionaire, CEO of Daniels Capital. The youngest woman to make Forbes 40 under 40 list last year. And she couldn't stop thinking about the man who jump-started her car with rough hands and a gentle heart. The man who didn't know he'd just jump-started something else entirely. Delilah stood in the center of her childhood home's quiet foyer, heels in one hand, exhaustion pressing into her bones. The place had been vacant for 2 years since her father passed, and she'd only returned out of necessity. A boardroom scandal back in New York had left her under scrutiny, and her advisors insisted she vanish from the radar for a while. Lately, the city felt like a trap disguised in designer threads and rooftop views. Here, at least, no one expected her to explain herself. She padded barefoot across the hardwood floor, her steps echoing. The silence was jarring after months of board meetings and gala speeches. She'd forgotten how much space a small town gave you to think, and how loud your thoughts could get when nothing else filled the room. The next morning, the diner buzzed with its usual rhythm of clinking plates and murmured orders. Rowan was already at the counter, hunched over a chipped mug, flipping through a folder of invoices. His flannel sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing tan forearms streaked with faded scars and fresh ink lines. Delilah slid onto the stool beside him before he noticed her. "Morning," she said. He glanced up, surprised but not startled. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I'm full of surprises," he closed the folder. "Didn't peg you for the type to stick around long, neither did I," she admitted, "but the house needs work." "Figured I'd give it a little attention before deciding what to do with it," he nodded. "You'll need a good electrician. That place was old when I was a kid. You volunteering?" "I might be." Their eyes held for a moment. Then the waitress brought Delilah a black coffee without asking. Rowan watched her curiously. "Didn't expect you to be a regular." "I'm not, but I used to be." He let that sit for a moment, then asked, "So what made you come back now?" She traced the rim of her cup. "A few things fell apart. I needed to breathe. This place. It doesn't ask for explanations." "You're not wrong." She glanced at the folder. "Invoices." "Yeah. One of my clients backed out last minute means I'm short covering materials on another job." "Is that common?" "Often enough. People get nervous if they think you can't deliver fast." "Doesn't matter if you're reliable. It matters if you're flashy." "You don't strike me as the flashy type." "Good, I'm not trying to be." She tilted her head. "You always this honest with strangers." Rowan's mouth lifted at the edge. "You're not a stranger anymore." Later that day, Rowan pulled his truck into her cracked driveway and stepped out, toolbox in hand. She met him on the porch, dressed down in jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. He nodded. "If you're planning to stay a while, you'll need working lights and a fuse box that doesn't hum like it's about to combust." They walked through the creaking hallways together, and she watched him take in the details: the sagging floorboards, the uneven paint, the antique fixtures layered with dust. "You grew up here?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yeah, this house saw every version of me." Rowan set his toolbox down and popped open the panel in the hallway. "You planning to sell?" "I haven't decided." He worked in silence for a while, and she hovered nearby, suddenly unsure of what to do with herself. She wasn't used to watching someone else take charge, at least, not without them trying to impress her. Rowan worked clean and fast, his hands sure and precise. "You're good at this," she said. "Been doing it since I was 17. My dad put a wrench in my hand before I could drive." "Is he still around?" Rowan's jaw flexed. No, she didn't press. Instead, she glanced toward the kitchen. "Want something to drink?" "Water's good." While she poured 2 glasses, Rowan called out, "You ever plan to go back to the city?" "No. To whatever life had you driving a Mercedes in heels through this town at midnight?" She walked back, handing him a glass. "I'm not sure that life's still mine." They stood there, the air thick with quiet curiosity. "Naomi's at school?" she asked. "Kindergarten." "Misses her tooth fairy appointment by 3 weeks. She sounds fearless." "She is." She hesitated, then asked carefully, "Do you let people in?" Rowan met her gaze. "Not often." "Why not?" "Because they don't stay." Delilah didn't say anything. She just leaned back against the wall, watching the man rewiring her father's house with a steadiness that felt older than his years. It wasn't the house that was making her stay longer than planned. It was the way Rowan didn't try to charm her, the way he didn't ask what she was running from. The way he saw her, not the headlines, not the net worth, not the empire she'd built and barely escaped, just her. And that terrified her more than any scandal ever had. The first time Delilah saw Rowan with his daughter, it was on a Saturday morning outside the town's modest library. Naomi was crouched at the edge of the sidewalk, pointing at something in the grass, her tiny voice animated. Rowan knelt beside her, his hand resting on her back as he listened with absolute focus. Delilah hadn't meant to run into them. In fact, she'd taken the long way along the river path to clear her head. But something about the way Naomi tugged on her father's sleeve and the way he leaned in, like whatever she said was the most important thing in the world, made Delilah pause. Naomi spotted her first. "Dad, that's the lady with the shiny car." Rowan stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Delilah." Naomi ran over before he could say more. "Are you here for the book dragons too?" Delilah blinked. "Book dragons?" Naomi nodded solemnly. "They live in the library. You have to find their treasure or they get mad and hide the stories." "She made that up last week," Rowan said, catching up. "It's a scavenger hunt they do for the kids." "Well," Delilah said, crouching to Naomi's level, "I've never met a book dragon before." "Do you think I'd be allowed to join the hunt?" Naomi studied her. "Only if you promise not to steal their gold, I swear." Inside, the children's section was a colorful maze of paper dragons, glittery maps, and tiny wooden chests hidden behind books. Rowan hung back, watching the two of them poke through the shelves, Naomi's hand clasped tightly in Delilah's. "She talked to everyone like that?" Delilah asked over her shoulder. "Only people she likes," Rowan replied. After Naomi claimed her prize, a sticker sheet, and a small candy bar, Delilah offered to take them both out for lunch. Rowan hesitated until Naomi threw her arms around his waist and whispered something that made him sigh and nod. They ended up at a small cafe tucked behind the hardware store, one Delilah remembered from her teenage years. The waitress led them to a patio table under a string of mismatched lights. Naomi chattered through her grilled cheese, but Delilah noticed the way Rowan's eyes kept scanning the sidewalk, his jaw tense any time a passerby slowed near their table. "You always this jumpy in public?" she asked when Naomi skipped off to look at the potted plants near the entrance. Rowan didn't look at her. "It's a small town. People notice things." "Like what?" "Like who you're sitting with." Delilah set down her fork. "Are you worried they'll talk about me or you?" He met her gaze then. "Doesn't matter, they'll talk either way. Let them." Rowan leaned back. Not everyone can afford to ignore whispers. She didn't answer. Instead, she watched Naomi crouch to examine a butterfly on the rim of a planter. "I had no idea she was so full of stories," she said softly. "She's always been like that, even when things got hard." Delilah looked at him. "How bad did things get?" Rowan drummed his fingers once against the table, then stopped. "There were weeks I didn't know if the lights would stay on. I'd do side jobs after she went to bed. Sometimes I'd leave her with my neighbor, sometimes I'd take her with me, let her nap in the truck." Delilah's throat tightened. "I can't imagine doing that alone. You learn fast when you don't have a choice." There was no bitterness in his voice, only fact. Delilah studied him, saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the quiet steel in his posture. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to scare her off either. He was just telling her the truth. "Sounds like she's lucky," she said finally. Rowan gave a dry laugh. "I'm the lucky one." That night, Delilah returned to the house and stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the cracked molding and faded wallpaper. Her phone buzzed from the side table where she'd tossed it earlier, but she ignored it. She'd spent her career surrounded by men who wielded money like a weapon. Men who smiled too quickly and asked for favors they never returned. Rowan was the first man in years who didn't ask for anything at all. She opened her laptop and pulled up a list of local contractors. Halfway through dialing one of the numbers, she stopped. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts and found the name of her company's legal advisor. "I want to put the Daniels property into a restoration trust," she said when he picked up. "Nothing public, just quiet funding. Local workers only." There was a long pause on the other end. "You're rebuilding it." "No, I'm giving someone else the tools to do it." She hung up before he could question her further. The next morning, she drove to Naomi's school, parked across the street, and waited. When Rowan walked out of the building with Naomi skipping beside him, she stepped out of the car. "I have something to ask you," she said before he could speak. Rowan raised an eyebrow. "I want to hire you," she said, "officially, not just to patch up the house. I want a full restoration." I'll give you complete creative direction. I'll stay out of the way, he stared at her. Why? Because it deserves someone who understands its bones. And you think that's me? I know it is. Rowan looked down at Naomi, then back at Delilah. This isn't a small job. I'm not offering it because it's small, he hesitated. What's the catch? No catch, she said. Just trust. Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but in thought. Then he nodded once. I'll need to bring in help, whoever you trust. Naomi tugged on his arm. Can I help too? Rowan smiled down at her. You can be the site manager. Delilah laughed, surprised by how easily it escaped her. As they crossed the street together, her heels clicked on the pavement, each step echoing louder than the last. This wasn't part of her plan. She didn't have a plan anymore. But maybe, just maybe, she was finally walking toward something real. The first snow of the season had come early. Rowan stood just outside the house, a thin layer of frost crunching beneath his boots as he watched the last of the new windows go in. The morning sun was low, haloing the edges of the porch they'd spent weeks rebuilding. The job was nearly finished, but something else had been building alongside it, something far less tangible. Inside, Delilah was unwrapping the last of the light fixtures she'd ordered from a local artisan. She set them gently on the kitchen island, her movements slower than usual. Rowan stepped in, wiping his hands on a rag. You look like you're about to tell me something I won't like, he said, leaning against the doorway. She didn't look up. I got a call this morning from my board. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. There's an emergency vote scheduled in 48 hours. One of my executives circumvented a clause in our bylaws. They're trying to appoint an acting CEO. You're still CEO. For now, he crossed the room slowly. So what happens if they win? I lose everything I built. And every deal I made while I've been here will be picked apart. Rowan exhaled. Then you need to go back. She turned toward him. I don't want to. Well, wanting doesn't mean much when people are lining up to take your place. Delilah looked at him, her voice quieter. I finally found something that doesn't feel like a performance. You think I haven't noticed? Rowan asked. You're different when you're not holding back. I don't feel like I'm drowning here, she said. I don't feel like I have to fight to breathe. He stepped closer. But you're not just someone who ran from that world. You built it. You fought your way to the top. You made something no one could take until now. She hesitated. And what if going back means leaving this behind? Rowan's eyes didn't waver. Then you better be damn sure it's worth it. Delilah stood there, caught between the life she'd created and the one she'd stumbled into without meaning to. Finally, she nodded once. I'll go, she said, but I'm not going alone. Rowan blinked. What? You once told me Naomi likes stories. I want her to see how one ends when you choose to fight for it. He narrowed his eyes. You're talking about flying to New York. I have a jet on standby. We'll be back before the weekend's over. I can't just pick up, and I already called Mrs. Vance. She agreed to watch Naomi while we're gone. He stared at her. You thought of everything? No, just what mattered most. Rowan didn't speak for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. All right. Let's go win your company back. The next evening, the city skyline glowed beneath them as the jet descended over Manhattan. Rowan had never flown before, let alone in a plane where the seats reclined and champagne was offered like water. But none of it fazed him as much as seeing Delilah step out of the shadows and back into her armor. She wore a simple, sleek black dress, and her expression was calm. But there was a weight in her shoulders he hadn't seen before. The boardroom was a glass-walled fortress overlooking the river. 12 people sat along the table, whispering until Delilah walked in. Let's begin, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Rowan stood in the corner, silent, watching as she took back control with precision and grace. Every accusation was met with fact. Every challenge with evidence. And when the vote was called, it wasn't even close. The room emptied quickly afterward, leaving Delilah standing at the head of the table, hands braced on the wood. Rowan walked over. So, I'm still CEO, she looked up at him. But I resigned anyway, his brows lifted. You what? I'm selling my shares. I made sure the new leadership can't undo the ethics policies I put in place, and I structured the deal to fund a foundation named after my father. She paused. It'll support small-town rebuilds. Starting here, Rowan stared at her. You gave it all up. I didn't give it up. I traded it for something better." They flew home in silence. Naomi ran into Rowan's arms the moment they stepped off the jet, clinging to him like she hadn't seen him in a month instead of 2 days. Delilah knelt beside her. "I brought you something." Naomi peeked into the box Delilah held out and gasped. "It's a dragon, a book dragon," Delilah said. "He's looking for a new library to live in." Naomi hugged her fiercely, and Delilah's breath caught. The next week, the house was finished. Rowan stood on the new front porch, watching as Naomi ran through the yard, her laughter echoing. Delilah stood beside him, a mug in her hands. "You're really staying," he said. She nodded. "I had my attorney file the paperwork. The house is mine now, legally and emotionally." He looked at her. "You sure?" "I'm sure of one thing," she said, setting the mug down. "I fell in love in this house, not just with the walls or the town." Rowan's throat worked. "Delilah, you don't have to say anything," she said, stepping closer. "But I need you to know when my car died that night, I thought I was stranded. Turns out it was the best wrong turn I ever made." He pulled her into his arms, one hand at the back of her neck. "You didn't just fix this house. You gave us a future." She kissed him then, not with hesitation, but with every promise she hadn't spoken aloud. That spring, the house reopened its doors as a community learning center. Naomi cut the ribbon herself. A bronze plaque bearing her name hung near the entrance. Delilah stood beside Rowan as the town filtered in, her hand clasped in his, and for once there were no whispers. Just quiet awe, because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it shows up in a rusted-out truck, under a dark sky, beside a broken-down car. And sometimes it changes everything. The morning of the town's winter gala arrived with a sky draped in pale silver clouds, the kind that promised snow but held back, as if waiting for the right moment. Inside the newly restored community center, formerly Delilah's childhood home, the final touches were being set. White and gold garlands hung from the ceiling beams, and the scent of cinnamon and pine lingered in the air. Rowan adjusted the cuffs of his dark navy suit, tugging them once before glancing at his reflection in a small mirror backstage. He looked out of place in tailored fabric, but Naomi had insisted, tugging on his hand in the store until he'd agreed. She now sat on a bench near the back, wearing a deep green velvet dress and tiny patent leather shoes, her legs swinging as she hummed to herself. Delilah entered through the side door, and Rowan turned instinctively. The sight of her stopped him mid-breath. She wore a floor-length gown the color of aged champagne, with delicate silver threading that caught the light. Her hair was twisted back in soft waves, a single vintage hairpin anchoring it like a secret. The dress didn't shout, it whispered. "You clean up all right," she said, her voice warm. "Didn't realize I'd need a manual to wear cufflinks," Rowan replied. Naomi had to help. Delilah glanced at the little girl, who beamed proudly. "She has good taste. She takes after someone." Delilah tilted her head. "You mean you?" Rowan took a slow step forward. "I meant you." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I wasn't sure I'd be able to walk into this house tonight and not feel like I was chasing ghosts." "You're not," he said quietly. "You brought it back to life." They stood there as the hum of conversations began to rise on the other side of the door. Guests were arriving, people from the town, from the foundation, even a few former colleagues Delilah hadn't expected to see again, including her old mentor, who offered nothing more than a respectful nod before disappearing into the crowd. Naomi tugged on Rowan's hand. "Are we dancing?" "You know I've got 2 left feet," he said. Delilah extended her hand to Naomi. "I'll start with her. You can join when you're brave enough." He watched them twirl beneath the golden lights, the hem of Delilah's gown brushing the floor like mist. It wasn't until Naomi spun away to grab a cookie that Delilah turned and extended her hand toward him. "Dance with me," she said. Rowan hesitated. "I'll probably step on your toes. I'll take the risk." He let her lead him to the center of the room, the music shifting into something slow and full. There wasn't a single camera in sight, no press, no boardroom tension, just Rowan's hand sliding carefully along her waist, his other hand finding hers. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. "No," he said, voice low. "But I'm glad we did." "I didn't know what real love felt like until you," she said. The kind that doesn't need proving or chasing, the kind that just stays. He drew her closer. You didn't just walk back into town, Delilah. You walked into our lives like you belonged there the whole time. She rested her head against his shoulder. I want to build something new with you, not just a house or a foundation, a life. I want that too. The music faded, but they didn't stop moving. Not until Naomi appeared between them, tugging at their hands with exaggerated impatience. Time for cake, Rowan laughed. We better listen. She's the real boss. Later that night, after the last guest had gone and Naomi had fallen asleep in a pile of blankets upstairs, Delilah and Rowan stood together on the porch. The snow had finally begun to fall, soft and slow, blanketing the town in silence. I never thought I'd find peace again, Delilah said, her fingers laced with his. Not after everything. You didn't just find it, Rowan said. You made it. She turned to him. Come with me, he frowned. Where? Everywhere, wherever this goes, I want you beside me. I want Naomi to grow up knowing love that never questions itself. He kissed her then, not rushed or desperate, but steady and full, like a promise sealed beneath falling snow. I'm yours, he whispered. You've had me since the night your car broke down. That winter, Delilah officially launched the Daniels Foundation's first community project from the very house that started it all. Rowan was named lead designer and project coordinator for every build across the region. Naomi, when asked what her role was, announced she was head of snacks and storytelling, and no one questioned it. They moved into the house full-time soon after. Delilah converted one of the upstairs rooms into an office, but rarely used it. Most days, she preferred working from the kitchen table, where Naomi did her homework, and Rowan brought in blueprints to review over coffee. One evening, long after the spring thaw, Rowan stood on the back deck watching fireflies flicker across the yard. Delilah stepped up beside him barefoot in a soft cotton dress that brushed her knees. Naomi's asleep, she said. He nodded. She's been asking if we'll ever get married. Delilah raised an eyebrow. And what did you say? I told her we already are. We just haven't had the party yet, she smiled. Do you want the party? Only if you're the one walking toward me. I already did, she said. That night on the road, he turned and kissed her knuckles. Then let's make it official. They married that fall in the garden behind the house. Naomi handed over the rings, grinning so wide her cheeks hurt. There were no photographers, no headlines, only candles, laughter, and the sound of vows spoken without fear. And as the stars came out overhead, Rowan and Delilah danced again. This time, he didn't step on her toes.